I am, that's probably a good thing, so we won't start by ruining that.
Amen.
It's also the last time they're going to let me teach here, so, yeah. Awesome, glad to see someone's paying attention. All right, if you haven't figured out, you haven't been coming, we've been spending a great deal of emphasis trying to help all of us understand this business of being restored to sanity and being restored from insanity. And we're going to continue talking that today. But before we do, how many people were here last week? Oh, that's a whole bunch of you. Cool. Now, if you remember, we had a real good teacher up here by the name of Judy. Judy, come on here for a second. Come up here and help a brother out. My man. Now, if y'all remember, last week, Junior, in addition to preaching and teaching a great recovery message about the prodigal son, he also gave you a challenge. Can you smell what the dog is cooking? Yeah. Oh boy. So last week, he challenged you at the end of the service to, get up about 10 minutes early and spend some time, maybe starting in the Gospel of John and reading about a chapter a day, staying up 10 minutes later, and no, not going through your Facebook page, even though I know you're on Recovery Church, and looking at social media and all that stuff. Spend some time with God. And so Junior was, he was rough, challenging you there. So I have to ask, I really do. How many people did that this last week? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. There we go. Who's your dad? All right, give it up for Julian. Pastor Phil, who said you don't get paid up here teaching? There's no way to lose your money. Alright, so we're going to have a little bit of fun going over, like I didn't have alcohol when I came into the program, I had alcoholism, and we were going on this ISM, and it all kind of came, at least for me, and the message that I got was being taught about a couple decades ago was, I had an instant short-term memory problem, and it had to do with not just the addiction, but the unmanageability. And so we've been kind of hitting that up, and Jordan hit the next one for me. Today we're going to talk about insanity seduces me. And for those of you who really need this, get your minds out of the gutter. We're talking about alcoholism and addiction, so easy does it out there. But nonetheless, last week, if you remember, Junior taught on the prodigal son, and he taught about some real important things. And if you've been reading the big book, you know that on page 18, it talks about alcoholism and addiction being an illness that's different than other illnesses and maladies that affect mankind. And one of the things that it does is with it goes the annihilation of all things worthwhile in life. And if you're sitting here and you've had addiction in your life, you know that over the course of the long run, it was a losing season. It was a losing game. In fact, a lot of people lost a lot of things. And as Pastor Phil was up here making the announcement, he reminded us of the fact that, some people lose it all and don't get a chance. And this annihilation, and the prodigal son that Judy was talking about, he was in the pig pen. He lost everything: his inheritance, his ability to earn a living, and he lost everything. And the other thing that he taught was this business about this positive genius. The big book talks about it this way: this positive genius for getting tight at the absolute wrong time. How many people promised, gave you a word, your integrity, your honor, that you were going to do a certain thing, you were going to be at a certain place, and you meant it when you made that promise, but suddenly the call, the craving, the real master called our name. And then that priority took reign over every other promise, every other responsibility. And all of a sudden, the absolute worst time, it was a job interview, maybe it was just getting back with the family, who knows what it was, getting out of the trouble with the law, and there was relapse around the corner. So this insanity we can talk for hours and hours and weeks and months about. And you may ask, and I want to answer the question, you may ask, okay, listen, you guys have been teaching us a few weeks. All right, let's move on, man. Why are you spending so much time hitting this from so many different angles and so many different perspectives? I'm going to tell you why. If I don't truly understand in my heart that I, in my best day, have the propensity to screw my entire life up, and I don't realize, beyond any shadow of delusion of pride or grandeur, that I need help, real help, to not do it again, if I'm not 100% convinced that that's true in my life, well, guess what? I'm going to believe that threadbare lie that I told myself a million times before. This time, it'll be different. I got this. And like we've talked about over and over and over, how many times have we in our own life done that? And it's time to stop living in the delusion. It's time to stop. And the one way to do that is through the third step. And how can you do a third step where you make that decision to turn your will and life over if you haven't fully conceded to your innermost self that this thing has got you and you got this thing, and without help it's too much for you? So that's why we're talking about this. So today, go ahead, we're going to talk about these insane thoughts and actions. And again, there's perspectives, there's perceptions, there's behaviors, there's attitudes. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Using, last week, Junior hit you with the Word, which is good. I'll throw in some of that, of course. You can't get away from Recovery Church without a good dose of the Word. But I'm also going to throw in a little bit of the big book. And I hope that nobody finds this offensive, but it really teaches the lesson of insanity real well. And we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the jaywalker and this curious mental phenomenon. And this curious mental phenomenon is what sets up this, what the big book calls at certain times. Like you could be good today, and you could be good tomorrow, and you could be you're real good, Wednesday, and you could be convinced that you shouldn't do this anymore, and you could be even on Thursday thankful that you're not involved in that anymore, and you're going to Recovery Church, and you're doing good. Yeah, I feel good. Getting some blood flowing through this alcohol system of mine, I'm doing good. And then Friday, I get paid. It's on like Donkey Kong. And at a certain time, and I'll tell you something for free, a little head start, little sneak peek. If you're not preparing, if you're early in recovery and you're not preparing for that certain time is going to pounce on you, just like the snake in the garden, and going to jump on Eve, and it's going to be all over but the crying. So please take this to heart, and please take action on the ideas and the principles that we're teaching, because they're straight out of the Bible, and of course, they're straight out of the big book. So, speaking of the big book, let's get into it. We're going to talk about this jaywalker. The jaywalker. Our behavior, page 37 and 8, our behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. He gets a thrill out of skipping out in front of fast-moving vehicles. Now, I happen to really like this metaphor or this analogy, because when I'm playing with drugs and alcohol, I'm really dealing with something moving a lot faster than I am and a lot more powerful than I am. And if I'm not careful and I'm in the wrong place at the wrong time, it's going to run me down, and it's not even going to slow down for doing it. So it's a great analogy. So let's move on to the next one. The story, if the story ended there, it wouldn't have been that bad, but as you know, it goes on. Luck, I don't know if anybody lived in this neighborhood for a while, Luck then deserted him. Dodging and weaving and jumping over like, Tom Cruise jumping over the front end of the car. concussion. He was slightly injured several times in succession. And I want to ask you, how many people in your own history had what I call those warning shots, those red flags? Anybody have those? And how many people didn't listen? Yeah, right. And you know the infamous question, right? How'd that end up working out for you? Yeah, you got it. All right, you guys are getting it. Good. Okay, so you'd expect him, this is a cutter, if he were normal, not me, to cut it out, right? It's like burning your hand on a stove. You burn your hand on a stove, you don't have to touch it with all 10 fingers before you realize that red glowing element on top is not a lollipop. You get what I'm saying? Your common sense would teach you, but no, it doesn't work that way. So you see, presently he's hit again, and this time he has a fractured skull. Within a week after leaving the hospital, a fast-moving trolley car breaks his arm. How many people have experienced one injury or consequence after another, after another, after another? Wow. Okay, let's hit the next one. He tells you, and let's see if you've ever said it. Has anyone said and meant it, I'll never do it again? Yeah. Exactly. So this is this guy right here. He tells you he has decided to stop jaywalking for good. I'm never going to do that again. But in a few weeks, this dude is good, man. He went a few weeks. A few hours for me. But this guy went a few weeks. I can take my hat off to him. He breaks both legs. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or to keep off the streets altogether. He tries, listen to this, every known means to get the jaywalking idea out of his head. If we're honest, we had many of those internal pep talks, telling us, begging us, ordering us, whatever us, not to do it again. And there I am, all lit up again. So that's part of the insanity. And again, of course, you know, this has a spiritual foundation, so hit me with a reading from Ephesians, the next one, Jordan, please. And it says this, their minds, now this was written way before the big book ever was written, so just look at how this beautiful explanation of what's going on here, for me who's so plagued by this thing, right? Their minds are in the dark, and they are stubborn and ignorant and have missed out on the life that comes from God. They no longer have any feeling about what is right, and they are so greedy that they do all kinds of indecent things. I don't know about you, but my behaviors, my actions, my attitudes, my perspectives, my values kept sinking and sinking and sinking, justifying what I wanted to do, when I wanted to do it, no matter how I had to get it done. And that's the spiritual darkness that this is talking about. Now, remember, if you're not used to me, yeah, I show you the problem, and I show it to you pretty deep and pretty hard, so it's kind of like a punch in the gut. But just, get excited, run out of here, I'm going to go get drunk. If I'm going to show you the problem, what am I going to do in a little bit? Show you the solution. I'm going to show you the solution, right? That's right. Good. So before we get to the solution, though, there's this whole setup. And I want to leave you with, as far as the problem, I'm going to talk about one other aspect of it, but I want to leave you with this pivotal idea. And no matter how you slice out the insanity of addiction, how you show and explain the insanity of the unmanageability, it all occurs, listen to me, it all occurs because the chronic administration of these mood-altering substances, day in and day out, being active, as you know, in the brain over a chronic and prolonged period, listen to me, it changes the brain. And science, now they didn't have this back when they wrote the big book, but science is now showing more clearly and more descriptively exactly what parts of the brain and what pathways in between those different parts are being affected. So the idea I want you to hold on to, and if you're taking notes or you're going to tattoo something on your forehead, then let it be this. Mood-altering substances over the long term literally hijack your brain, and they take over. Okay, so it's these pathways, and if you wanted to get specific, I don't have time to do it, but the neurobiology, it's the reward pathways in the brain, primarily through the dopamine receptor system. Okay, the pleasure center, you've heard of all these things if you've been to some of the doctor lectures, then that's the pathway that gets hijacked. And that promise of that reward, that high, that oblivion, that buzz, that comfort, that prize drives you, drives me, drives us to incredible, incredible ends. And that's what happens in the brain. And the big book talks about it this way. If we can hit the next one, it talks about this curious mental phenomenon. And on page 37, it says this: but there was always the curious mental phenomenon that parallel with our sound reasoning, there inevitably ran some insanely trivial excuse for taking the first drink. Our sound reasoning failed to hold us in check, and the insane idea ran out. This is the idea of saying no today, tomorrow, the next day. No, you know you got your job on the line, you know you got your marriage on the line, you know you got your freedom on the line with the parole officer or what have you, you know you got charges, you know you got lawyer appointments, you know you got health problems, you know you got all these things. But then the idea comes, the boss pissed you off, or you had a bad day, or you don't feel right and you deserve to get right. Yeah. And there you go again. And that's that curious mental phenomenon. It doesn't matter how convinced, how resoluted, how integrally bound I am to this sobriety thing, I am 100% absolutely powerless to stay that way on my own. And that is an indication of the depth of insanity, of addiction. Now, let's hit the next one. And this is on page 24. This is that certain time thing we talked about. We're unable, and this is the key, at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We're out of defense against the first drink. Now, this certain time thing is what almost killed Bill Wilson. If you read Bill's story in the front of the book, he went to the hospital in dang near delirium tremens like a few times, more than once. He wasn't a white chip wonder, okay? And the story, as he tells, is like one time it was fear. Fear sobered him up. And then another time it was pride sobered him up. And it was his family, his wife. He looked at how this was killing his wife, and that ounce of nobility as a husband sobered him up. But it never kept him sober very long. And this is why. He had no idea about this issue at certain times. And before I tell you a little bit about that, my challenge to you, want to make another bet? My challenge to you is to go home, not now, I'm not going to say something, and write down a dozen of those certain times. In other words, what are your certain times? Because your certain times, I guarantee you, are different than mine. Okay? And if you're not going to go out there and take some action and do something about those certain times in your life, then those certain times are going to surely be prepared to do something about you when you ain't looking. Okay? So Bill Wilson had no idea about this certain time. And here was an example of the certain time that really boiled Bill Wilson's onion. You know, he would, like I say, be sober for months, and he was a stockbroker, as you probably know if you read his story. And so his normal life would be not only working during the day, but in the evening, entertaining, and where there'd be booze all over, and conviviality, and partying, and whatnot. And that was just part of his job. And when he was not going to drink, and he was steadfast, committed to this, he would be in front of the drink over and over and over, day in, day out, and he didn't have people offer him drinks, no thanks, no thanks, no thanks, no thanks. And he would push hundreds of drinks away over a course of time. Then, suddenly, would come his certain time. And let me tell you what his certain time was. And I'll bet you $1 and a donut, some of you have the exact same certain time. He would say to himself, maybe I'm making too big of a deal of this alcoholic thing. You know what I mean? Look at, I'm allowing this stuff any in there. I'm saying no here and no there. Ain't bothering, ain't got no craving, I'm doing good. Maybe I'm making too big a deal of this. And this was his certain time. He would let his guard down. And you know, tick, 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 tick. It was just a matter of time once he let that guard down that he might say no a few, who knows many, how many dozen or whatever, 100, whatever times. But then suddenly, his guard's down. Instead of saying no, in a short order, he's saying what? Bring it on. That led him to another trip to the asylum. So the challenge is for you to identify what are your certain times, so that when they come, maybe it's a family member, a family outing, maybe it's a neighborhood, maybe it's a job, maybe it's an emotion. I'll tell you one of my certain times. This is a little bit screwy for me. I'm a little bit different than the average bear. You might think, and this is a trigger, if you will, or a certain time for many people, is when things get tough. They have a crisis in their life, so in order to cope with it, they bury their head in a syringe or a crack pipe or a bottle or whatever the case may be. Me, I was the opposite. During the crisis, I could hang, man. I was tough. I was the guy that people came to in the crisis. I would handle it, and boom, 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 and I'd be good, and I didn't have time for that for now. But then when the crisis was over, it was time to celebrate. After all, look at how good I just did, right? I deserve a break today, man. I should do a McDonald's commercial, you know what I'm saying? And I would say, now, sound like Donkey Kong. And that was one of my certain times. So, I'll ask you, what are your certain times? So if the solution, if the problem is altered neural pathways, pathologically, by this poison that's basically dissolved in my brain, to put it in an easy-to-understand way, if the problem is pathological, abnormal neural pathways, in other words, the fibers, the connections, or the responses, or the whatevers are messed up, well then the solution is, and this isn't too hard to figure out, the solution is to fix those pathways, right? Well, do you think that's going to happen overnight?
No.
Do you think that's going to happen just because you went through detox?
No.
Do you think that's going to happen because you went to a couple of groups in treatment?
Exactly.
Do you think it's just going to happen just because you came here to Recovery Church tonight to listen to my fat butt?
No.
Yup. Thank you for overestimating me. No, it's going to take a little bit more than that. So let's go to the next slide, if you would. So what's the solution? Hit it. Page 25. When therefore we're approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us to do but pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet.
Come on.
Now let's just use this metaphor here for a second so you get this idea. If I just pick up those tools, book says pick up the tools, I just did. Is it going to do me any good? No. I got to start using them. So the sponsor, the steps, okay, all these principles, these actions that are in the program, I have to actually do them. The inventory, the surrender, the accountability, the transparency, the trust. Do you get what I'm saying? There's no spiritual Lone Rangers in here. Life is tough. I don't know about you, but I need help. I need to transparently talk to somebody and say, hey man, I'm having a rough time. Okay? There's times when I'm doing all right, and someone else is having a tough time, and I can help them. But sometimes I need someone to help me. And sometimes things really are messing me up, and I got to put pen to paper, and I got to do some writing. Maybe I got to do this thing called a 10-step. I got to do a mini 4-step. I got to get some stuff on on paper. I got to do some action so this resentment won't consume me. This is an action program. So the tools that are laid at our feet, these spiritual principles, these spiritual actions, are meant to be picked up, yes, but used, taken out of the bag and put into practice. Can I have the next slide, please? And on page 62, look at the important ingredient. Because the tools wouldn't have much effect if there wasn't power behind the tools, okay? So page 62 says this: many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. Check out this last part. We had to have God's help. Okay? So if I take the action, the spiritual kit of tools in one hand, and then in my other hand, I'm grabbing God's hand who wants to walk with me. Now I'm bringing the action to the power. And that's what's going to rearrange my brain. See, my brain in my addiction was trained like Pavlov's dog. You ever hear that Pavlov's dog thing? You know, you ring a bell, you can make a dog salivate because you give him all these treats. Well, my brain had all these treats for all these years and was always looking for that get high, that buzz, right? And so now I'm not using it anymore. I go into a mini emotional crisis because I don't got my num-nums anymore, you know? Somebody took my nook-nook out of my mouth, and I'm like, oh man, I'm miserable. Where's my feeling goodies? You know what I'm saying? So now I need to replace that poison that was feeling good. I need to replace the poison with the power. I don't think you get that. I got to get rid of the poison that was making me, quote-unquote, feeling good. You ever think about that? If the stuff that you were taking really made you feel good, then how was it when you ended up in treatment you were feeling so bad? You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's another example of insanity. So I'm going to replace that insane idea that the poison is going to make me feel better, and I got to go to the power that always will. See, the power allows the healing, not just in the messed up brain, but in my heart that's broken. Because I don't know about you. I had little problems in my childhood that messed with me inside. I had problems of my own making and my own addiction that messed me up inside. I needed some healing on the inside so I could stay and feel okay on the inside. You get where I'm coming from? Yeah. So that power had the ability not just to make me feel good and okay, it made me have the ability to feel whole. And I was okay on the inside, even when things on the outside weren't okay. And that's what faith is all about. Trusting in Him, not only on the mountaintops when things are great, but trusting in Him when the burden is heavy and the night is dark. See, and that's where you have to have power. No amount of human emotionalism is going to be able to stand up to the daily strains of this crazy society if I have this addiction thing inside of me, if I don't have the real power to heal me from the inside out. And that's why we have to have the action, the tools, and we have to have the power. Let's have another one, another slide. I think it's the last one. And so this is in Philippians 2nd chapter. God is working in you, and this is what you find as you go on this journey of the 12 steps with the sponsor. God is working in you to make you willing and able to obey Him. And the reason this is important, God doesn't want you to obey Him just to ruin your life and bore you. No, He's giving you these guidelines to protect you and to keep you safe and to prosper you. So when we follow God's plan for our lives work out a whole lot better. And that's the key to recovery. Realizing this is a real God with a real plan and real power, and really open up through the 12 steps, no matter how crazy it may sound in the beginning, opening up through the 12 steps and the possibility. And if you take little steps, even baby steps, you'll start to see that this works in your life, and that'll encourage you to take greater steps.